ready. It's time to forge the narrative.
Hey everybody, welcome to Forge the Narrative. My name is Paul Murphy, your host. We are the Bella Lost Souls podcast. This is episode 190. I'm joined today by Chris Morgan and Adam Abramowitz.
My baloney has a first name.
It's Morale.
Morale is going to be pretty significant coming up in 8th edition. Obviously, we have been getting daily updates from the Warhammer community page with little snippets of rules of what the new phases are going to be, things we can expect in the new game. And, I've had people all over the place talking about how are they going to keep this up? How are they going to keep giving us stuff for however long it takes until they're going to release this game? And the answer is, we're going to get a lot of info. They've already got a lot of this info nailed down, and things like even data slates. We're going to start seeing formations. We're going to start seeing rules for units. They could pretty much keep us strung along for, I'd probably say, about a month and a half if they wanted to.
I would just say that I think that they have been very careful with what they are and aren't saying. A lot of the stuff that they're saying is a description of a rule and not the verbatim of a rule. And so that's what's feeding the speculation fire, is that people are taking the description as the doctrine. And that is creating a lot of interesting conversations and some late night phone calls for me for clarification.
Man, I can tell you guys that some people are just flat out terrible at predicting things. But that's either here or there. I think that you definitely have captured the essence of what we're seeing here. We are speaking about rules and things conversationally. We're not so much seeing the hard line, short sentence of this is what the rule is and this is how it interacts with this and flip and forth. But remember, though, we're only getting 12 pages of rules, that of the base rules. So, we've already seen more content, more dialogue than the 12 pages than we're going to get in the rules. That means that there's, in the Slim Rules Pro platform, there's going to be a heck of a lot of, connectivity, complication, strategic stuff that we can pull off, complexity, and I'm happy to see it. I cannot wait to see it all together. It's been pretty fun. As we've been getting these rules come out on the website, I've been doing some little YouTube videos, almost like reaction videos on them, and giving a little bit of insight on the Forge the Narrative YouTube page. You can find that link in the body of the post, but it's just YouTube Forge the Narrative. You can find it.
So basically, all you need to do is go and watch those. We don't really have a show for you today because Paul's covered everything. So
no, I've covered just the initial reaction to this stuff. I mean, we're going to dive deep into some of this stuff about what we think is going to happen, what we, how we already linking it all together, because we've seen the morale phase, the fight phase, charge rules, shooting, and psychic. I mean, that's big stuff. And like you said, Chris, we're getting the essence of the rule and not the granularity of the rule and how it really applies to what our game is going to be like.
The YouTube videos are more like the fan reaction as opposed to let's break down what they actually said, like we're about to do tonight.
Yeah, only reason I'm doing those is because I'm so excited about this stuff. I mean, as we all...
The hype is real.
Yeah.
It's... A lot of people are talking about, well, this is just going to get exhausting, but by the time, however many weeks it's going to take for the edition to come out, I'm just going to be like, all right, I'm done. Yeah, I'm not quite feeling the attrition yet, just because there's so much that we don't know. I mean, I don't look at all. It's like a 5,000 piece puzzle, and we have 6 pieces set out, and people think, oh, I can see what the picture is. It's like, no, we can't yet. And that's what makes it exciting. That's what drives the conversation.
I mean, let's just start out with the psychic rules. The psychic rules, it's been boiled down to where every army that can take a psyker now has a reason to. Whereas before, like in the tournament scene, you wouldn't take one psyker and expect to really do anything. You would take
100 of them.
You have to take all these, dice caddies, essentially contributors.
Yeah, like batteries. It's like, this model is just a battery for my one guy that has the good powers.
Which I think led to some feel bad experiences, because you're playing against Cabal and you're playing against Librarius, Conclave, or Seer. And I'm a victim of it. I've played Conclave and Seer Council, and it's not fun.
That makes you the perpetrator, not the victim. Just so you know.
Oh, no. I'm saying I understand. Like it causes, when you're going to a tournament, Chris. You understand. Like you're trying to bring the best, but
no, yeah, that's a social contract. I'm not hating.
Well, what you run into though is that most are you're rarely going to come up against 2 psychic juggernauts. You're going to have one guy who has completely and totally forsaken the psychic phase, and one guy that's 38 dice deep.
Right.
Yeah. And if you bring like that single model psyker who by reputation is supposed to be super cool, I mean, even the guys that don't have powers, like say you roll a 6 on your charge dice and you've got one psyker, I mean, chances are you're not even going to get your powers off. So,
but they've taken that out. We know that. So we're basically beating the dead horse on that now. I apologize. But what it is now is that every psychic power that a psyker has plus smite is going to be on their data slate, and they can cast every single one of those powers from what I can tell.
Wait. So hold on. They can cast I thought they could only pass it's not mastery level now. Chris, what are they calling it?
Well, what I understand from the psychic article that they put out, the article itself is not psychic, guys. It's not reading your mind. But the article that they put out essentially says that each faction that has psychers has their own tree. Now, it doesn't explicitly say that everyone knows every power from that tree and can cast it at will. I imagine that it's going to be something more akin to 5th edition where you would pick your powers when you built your army list. And the thing I like about that is that it's going to help every power have a purpose. I wrote an article on Frontline Gaming site about this, where basically, if you're going to let people choose their powers, you have to give them 6 good choices. Because if you don't, and you only give them one good choice, then what's the point?
That's the one every time. And you're actually, let me clarify, it says each time you pick a psyker, you can cast as many spells as their data sheet states. So it won't be every spell on their slate. It'll be this power. This guy can cast 3 powers, 2 powers, 1 power, or whatever.
And the other cool thing about that, I think one of my favorite mechanics from that is that when denying psychic powers, you have to be within 24 inches, but you can only attempt to deny with one psyker up to the amount of warp charge that he's got. Paul, do you remember back in the days of the old psychic hood where you could just roll a d6 and shut down somebody's powers?
Oh, it was even worse with the rune staff, or the rune weapon,
right?
The space wolf.
Yeah, that was that was ridiculous. I
loved it.
Yes, but it was great if you were doing it. Not as great if you're on the receiving end.
Provided you could ever roll a 4+, which I'm not known for. So
yeah, especially for charge distances, right?
Well, so you get the tree, and then you can have smite, and smite is incredibly potent. It has a warp charge value of 5, meaning on 2d6. Remember, every power is cast on 2d6. You're trying to beat the warp charge value of the power. If you manifest it, you're able to shoot an enemy within 18 inches of the psyker, and they suffer D3 mortal wounds. If you roll a 10 or more, the target suffers D6 mortal wounds. So what are mortal wounds? These cannot be saved by any means and punch straight through thick armor and even invulnerable saves.
Maybe D.
Yeah, I mean, I think I love the mortal wound mechanic in 40k, and people are going to be like, no, that's dumb. I want to roll dice. I want to protect myself. But we want stuff to die. And the great thing about doing stuff like mortal wounds is you can put mortal wounds on weapons that aren't psychic powers. A Tau railgun, for example, the big hammerhead railgun or something. You can have an awesome weapon that is just built to wreck face. You can distribute it more evenly among all the factions, so that you don't have some armies that have almost no access to things like D or stomps or anything like that. And you can give them a tool. You can give them a tool to peel wounds off of anything. And since everything's got wounds, it makes sense to me. I love it.
I mean, going back to the psychic phase, though, Chris, any army that has a psyker, so sorry Tau, sorry Necrons, has access to smite. Unless I misread.
And that's what leads me to believe that stuff like, I mean, I'm glad you said Necrons, because the Satan have had that awful random power mechanic.
Yeah.
It wasn't a psychic power, but now, if that changes much like psychic powers did, I will bet you money that there's going to be some kind of mortal wound power that those guys can do in the new edition.
They're going to spread that stuff around. But you'll see, like in Age of Sigmar, there are things that specifically have less mortal wounds, but maybe they do more damage if they do get through. There's what they're doing is introducing mechanics that they can play with, like on a slider. So we want these guys to be more of this. Okay, well, let's dial it up. Right. We want these guys to be less and slide it back down. So you've got this thing they can do, and then introducing a powerful power, and this is just the one they've given us. I mean, heck, this could be the best one in the bunch, but we know it's not, right? We know it's not. But giving every army that has a psyker access to this can you imagine a Primaris psyker? I mean, his lightning power was okay before, but this is way better. This is
the new Psy Shriek.
An Inquisitorial psyker, obviously pretty good. You've got a backup for Tigurius or something. If the powers that he has access to aren't good against certain armies, then you could always fall back on this.
Grey
So
Knights.
Are we assuming that in 8th edition we will be picking our powers?
I believe so.
No, it almost pretty much explicitly says that you're going to be able to pick the powers you want.
So for those listening that are like me and don't know, how would that work? Is it a point allotment? Do these powers cost points, or do you just pick from a sheet?
The way it looks in the battle tomes for Age of Sigmar, and I can tell you specifically this for Sylvaneth, is that everything is on a chart for D6. And then it tells you, these are what your options are if you have a wizard, or you want to take an artifact, or whatever. You can choose what you take, or you can roll.
Or you can roll a D6, right.
That's now that. Everyone picks. I don't know a single person that rolls, unless maybe they're playing in a narrative type environment. But that one thing right there, that one thing in that book, that one line of text, automatically includes the 3 different styles of play. You've got match play, narrative play, and then open play. You can choose to rule it however you want, whatever fits your style.
Do you think invisibility is going to exist in this edition?
Not in the way that it does now. Absolutely. I would imagine you could change it to be to hit modifier, but from what it sounds like, they're doing away with the generic psychic trees in favor of faction specific 6 powers.
Hey, I found my new favorite psychic power, and that's all I ever need. It's called Quickening. I'm sure you guys have talked about it before. I don't know. Have you guys ever heard of it?
Been talking about that since 3rd ed, bro.
It's as long as I get to that, I'm going to be stoked.
Yeah. Well, this is way too soon to tell what's going to be there, but I would imagine that there's going to be a theme element to every faction's psychic powers.
I dig that.
The real great takeaway here is that you no longer have to, if you want to play in the psyche phase, if you want to exist, if you think it's cool to take Mephiston in your list and you want to have the rest of it be a traditional codex type army, if you think it's cool to have an inquisitorial psyker, an inquisitor in your list, and want like Greyfax to get her power off, you don't have to take a bunch of other useless, I should say less themey stuff to you, less exciting stuff to you. You will now be able to play that character and cast powers as if it were a functional part of your army.
And that's probably the number one favorite part I have about this is where armies that don't have as much inbuilt access to psychers in this edition, the fact that we're going to be able to bring these guys and they're going to be able to do work, and we aren't going to need to go to extreme lengths to get a pool of dice. I mean, and I wasn't hating on the psychic phase for most of this edition, but the truth be told, there were some instances where I just knew I couldn't do anything.
I think the psychic phase was the god phase towards the end of 7th. I think at early onset of 7th, it was obviously the shooting phase. We had range D, we had all kinds of mechanics like that. But as we had the Librarius Conclave released, we had the Cyclopean Cabal, and even further down the line, Magnus and lists like that. The god phase was the magic phase, was the psychic phase, where you had lists who had 21 to 24 powers on the table when you lined up against them, and God knows how many dice. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure that never changed for demon players from start of 7th to finish.
The shooting phase. The shooting phase is a lot more dynamic also. Now, see, and this is where we're talking about, you start to get, you get all kind of beautiful mind on things, and you start linking up, well, this post said this, and this post said this, and what does it all mean all together? When we first got the shooting phase dropped here, it says, you can't shoot if there's an enemy within 1 inch of you, and that just like, what does that even mean?
Unless you got pistols, bro.
I'm pretty sure that it means that you can't shoot at anything that's within 1 inch of you.
But why was that significant? Obviously
right.
Because it is now where you're engaged if you're within 1 inch of an enemy and things like that. So there's going to be stuff that we aren't seeing that's not explicitly stated in all these that we're going to have to, we can infer lots of things and we can guess. And all we're doing, guys, we're giving our best guess and analysis on what we know so far.
Oh yeah, I mean this is not canon. We have no officiality here, but I think we're just as stoked and nerding out about it as much as everybody else is at home, and we want to share our thoughts.
the phase here of the shooting, it says you can specifically, pistols get a lot more exciting. Now, pistols have gone through a weird life. I shouldn't say weird. They've gone through an up and down in life. There was a time where if you didn't move, you could fire your pistol twice. I'm sure there were times when you could have used it in combat. Actually, I don't remember a time that you could actually use it in combat.
I can't think of one either, but I do remember that awkward time in, I think it was 4th edition, where it's like if you stood still and you didn't move, you could fire your pistol twice, but you couldn't charge. But you could fire it once and still charge. There's been a lot of change within pistol mechanics.
There was like 4 weeks there where the Vindicare assassin was actually more powerful with his pistol than he was his rifle. It's like standing behind a melee unit firing into melee.
Pew pew.
Anyway, whatever. We don't have that. We might not have that right now. So. When picking your target, you won't be able to shoot enemies that are in close combat with other units, which there was a lot of talk about that. Could you shoot in or out of combat? However, you can fall back, letting you shoot or whatever. But it says you can use your pistols in close combat.
In the shooting phase. Yeah. So in your shooting phase, if you have dudes with pistols in close combat, they're going to be able to shoot the unit they're engaged with. I think that's fantastic.
And hopefully also then fight in the combat phase. So you got a guy, blessed out, like Cypher is the example here because he's the 40k Bad Mama Jamma gunslinger. But for stuff like Blood Angels, let's say hand flamers do D3. All right. I mean, in flamers a D6 and hand flamers a D3. Be able to pop off a guy with 2 hand flamers and then pull out his power sword and start stabbing. That dude becomes real deadly if that's possible.
Hold on. When did a Death Company guy turn into a crisis suit? When could he take 3 weapons?
Well, what we're talking about here is more sergeants, because what I'm thinking of are the double melta pistol guys. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the hand flamer, and until I see the stats for 8th, I'm not going to start making more hand flamer dudes. I am a big fan of the melta pistols because if I know anything, that if you shoot someone point blank in the face with a melta pistol,
they're going to die.
At the very least, they're going to have a very bad migraine.
They will. So, you never take your helmet off. Otherwise you might get a melt shot to the face. But if this is, now again, we're reading a discussion about a rule, not a rule, right? So models with the handheld firearms can shoot at the closest enemy target in the shooting phase, even if they themselves are locked in combat. This is going to make characters the pistols incredibly deadly up close. So that would be really interesting if they can fire pistols. I mean, and this makes Sikaris and Mephiston and everyone, and Karn, every one of those silly characters that we know is the mark of being a complete and total heavy hitter is carrying a plasma pistol, is now going to fire that plasma pistol during the combat phase, or in close combat.
I remember talking to you, Paul, about reading that Mephiston novel that David Annandale wrote, and at one point, David wrote about how Mephiston took the overheat from the pistol and blasted his opponent with it psychically. And now I'm thinking, like, I'm totally going to do that. I am totally going to make that a reality. So life goals. Hashtag life goals.
Think of this is that I think that the rules have finally caught up to that awesome novel because Mephiston, I think, used Smite on somebody.
Yeah. There's he certainly pulls no punches.
When he blew that guy up as he's running across the battlefield or whatever, and hit somebody with a pretty explosive brain bullet. Maybe it was this Smite. Who knows? Heavy weapons. This is big. All right. Now, we don't know what's going to exist. Like if Skyhammer is still going to exist, or heavy weapons are worth talking about, is what the article says. So they no longer snap fire if you move. Instead, they have a flat -1 to hit modifier for moving units.
I like it.
So this applies to all models with heavy weapons, including vehicles. So that there in itself implies some other things about vehicles. I mean, I know we have right now that there's the different speeds, the combat speed, the skimmers, and all this stuff. There's all these different things to keep track of. I think that's going to get simplified.
I mean, can you imagine what this means for things like the Bale Predator that always, you could always stand still and shoot 2 of your flamers at a target if you wanted. But if you ever tried to move this guy up and shoot with him, it was a no-go. Like, if these weapons, like the flamer in the weapons profile, hit automatically, that -1 to hit, it doesn't matter. You rush that guy up, and all of a sudden you're pouring hot promethium over a bunch of people.
You don't have to jank around with that template.
So that immediately, in theory, gives a model like my Trogdor, who is all kitted out with flamers on all the sides, can actually do something on the table again.
With that -1 to hit, they also say that smoke launchers on vehicles have the same effect of -1 to hit. So I guess that means that if you have smoked your vehicle, then you're imparting a -1 to hit on someone else. So I would take that to mean that a heavy weapon moving to fire at a vehicle that has popped its smoke would be -2 to hit.
I think that you're not reaching too far with that hypothesis.
And then it goes on to say that cover saves give a blanket save to all units, and that there are some things that ignore cover. And they say Chaos Noise Marines is one of those things. That's a little
People need to start soundproofing their ruins, bro.
That's a little sprinkling. Like, hey, if you wanted to know maybe some things you might want to purchase in between now and then, and we're going to talk about on this show, in the second segment, we're going to talk about things to do while you're waiting on 8th edition, and buying Noise Marines may be one of those things.
Only if you're a heretic and a traitor.
I think that we're going to see terrain. If I can talk about terrain and cover for a minute, sidetracking us off this, but I think we're going to see terrain all have its own specific types of rules, and not every ruin is going to be a 4+ save. Not every crater is going to be a 5+. Again, they could make it simple and that'd be the case, but I think that we'll see some type of varying rules for this type of stuff because, we got on the live FAQ that every model, everything they sell stuff for, including terrain, is going to get its own rules. Not that it doesn't have it now, but I think it'll be a part of the main game.
We know that it won't be just a blanket 4-up or 5-up cover save. It's going to be a plus to whatever save that you already have. So if you have a 3-up armor save, being in a ruin might give you potentially a 2-up save.
Yeah, which
but do we know that
negatives on the weapons
right.
really have an effect? So something with a -6 save, well, what can save against that? Maybe nothing. Maybe it's only a Terminator in cover.
So, I understand that Games Workshop was trying to make this more simple and streamlined, but there's part of me that's saying, man, I should have paid more attention in math class when I was a kid because I have a feeling I'm going to struggle with some of this.
It's going to be a simple slider, man. It's going to be plus this, plus that, negative this, negative that, and every rule that you need is going to be right there on your page. You're not going to have to be.
If math was your problem, I think that the problem would have started for you in 7th edition.
So maybe I should play more 40k is what you're saying, Chris? If I played more 40k, then I'd be better at math. That's what you're saying.
I'm never going to tell you to play less 40k.
That's what you're saying. Okay, cool.
But yeah, we just talked for a pretty expansive amount of time on half a page article of rules. I mean, you were just talking about it a second ago, Adam, that the complexity is here for us to really use our generalship, I think. And of course, we're about efficiencies. I mentioned this on the Independent Character Show, is that we as tournament players, we chase that efficiency. So we're going to be looking for it. We're going to be trying to find it. And if the rules are slim, I guess light on words, it's going to be
less the game.
For the average player, like everything's going to be on their sheet. It's going to be easier for us to find things I think that we appreciate and like to play against, and there'll be less gotcha moments with how just the mechanics of the rules. Because in 7th edition there were tons of haha, you didn't know that, you didn't know that was on that page, you didn't know that was on that FAQ, so I'm going to get a little bit of an advantage in this situation.
If we could reduce the times that we need to call a judge over because of somebody trying to, or maybe just somebody has a different interpretation of the rules and that's how their army was built, the less that happens, I think, is the better for the future of 40k.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime if we can speed up how long it takes to play a game, even in a tournament setting, we're going to have a much better time, I think, overall. So speaking of speeding up, now we're skipping around. We're going to skip some of the stuff and talk about the real juicy thing we got today, and that was morale. Morale is one of those things that some armies just didn't give two craps about it. You could build your army, and I think there's probably going to be ways to still build towards this, but many armies didn't care about morale. You were fearless. You automatically passed a check. You could auto rally. You could do some ability that made you not care about it for that round. You could cast power on somebody that made them auto rally or fearless.
Those types of armies in a tournament, I always rolled a 6 on strategic.
Oh, the pinning test one?
Yeah. Oh, it doesn't matter. I'm fearless.
I always got that one versus the bike armies.
No joke. There's 100 ways to mitigate it. It barely mattered. And even if you got a unit fling off the table, and if they were like midway up the board, they still had 3 rounds of just having to manage that unit to do something, to hoping for insane courage, having to move them, having to snap shoot them. I mean, really not I can see their point. This is just something that we've just dealt with. We just dealt with it for years, and it really wasn't adding a ton of value to the game.
The main problem with morale in 7th edition 40k is the fact that the times where it actually does something, people forget to do it. Like, oh, you should have taken a fear test on that combat we did 2 rounds ago. I forgot about that. Well, let's do it now. Like, it never mattered.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff back and forth like that. Yeah, 40K is it was previously a lot about managing some of these things or remembering to do them. I mean, taking that fear test, God, there's a lot of people that forget to do that kind of stuff. I could take a rant on the optional things that we don't have to mess with anymore, but I'm glad we don't have to mess with stuff like that. Morale phase is now simple. It only happens once per turn. At the end of your phase, after everything has happened to everything, they've been blown apart by psychic powers, they've had a battle cannon dropped on them, they've got a couple people's limbs chopped off in close combat. Now that unit, after this, 6 seconds of battle or whatever, has to make a check. And the check is now even further simplified. You roll a d6 and add the number of models from the unit that have been slain. And if the number is bigger than the unit's leadership, the unit loses the difference in additional models. That is powerful. This specifically is saying models. It's not that you take a certain extra amount of wounds. It is that unit is losing models.
So you roll a d6 and add the number of casualties from the unit, and if the number is higher than the unit's leadership, it immediately loses the difference in remaining models.
Yes, and losing that models that could gut what we know is traditionally now a very expensive unit.
I love this. This is, in my opinion, what speeds the game up. You're no more worrying about falling back, rolling d6, rolling leadership checks every phase of the turn or anything like that. It's exactly what it is. If you failed by three models, pick them up. That's it.
This is one of those things that we'll start to see that slider come into effect, those things they can play with. It mentions here in the article that a Dark Apostle will be able to share his leadership to other members of his legion that are around him. So that's just giving an idea of one thing that could give a unit some insulation against taking a leadership test.
The big thing that I wonder about with all this, Paul, you mentioned leadership modifiers and things like that with the Dark Apostle example. The thing that makes me the most interested in how they're going to manage this is how those units that have been traditionally fearless all the time, like insert any Synapse creature and creature within Synapse, Death Company, throw any fearless. Yep, zombies. Zombies is a great example. How are these modifiers going to stack up, and how easy or hard is it going to be to do stuff like that? And I'm going to draw a comparison here. Because I've been reading through the Caradron Overlords book back and forth because I'm in love with that army. We're going to be doing another Sigmar show here soon, Paul, where I'll talk about that in more detail. But there is a relic you can take that can force a battle shock test, which is this leadership thing we're talking about, immediately after you get hit by it.
Oh, that's strong.
So that makes that unit, say you shoot a bunch of weapons and then you shoot this one last, they take a battle shock test in your shooting phase, and then they take another one with all those same modifiers at the end of the turn as well. Like, how many of those kind of things are we going to see in there? How is this going to be manipulated? I'm very curious.
I'm pretty sure that we might even see some terrain that could... Now, one of the tenets of this edition is that stats are no longer locked at 10. Can we agree on that? Can we agree that's been stated somewhere?
Yes, that was stated in pretty much the very first release that they did for this.
So I think it's conceivable that we'll see some things that buff leadership. Could be terrain features, it could be artifacts like you're talking about, or whatever, that give someone a plus to their leadership for morale checks. So, maybe the Shrine of the Imperium or the Honored Imperium terrain set could be something that gave somebody a +3 or +4 to their leadership or something for morale checks. Now, I'm not indicating that's what is going to be the case. I mean, that's something that they could do, and I think that's a conceivable way to do it. Any opinions on that?
I mean, I agree with you there, Paul. I mean, it's simple enough that it makes sense. That's all I have to say about that.
So then we get stuff that could maybe take away leadership. I mean, there's going to be modified. Like, we know the Hemlock Fighter that they call out in the article is an Eldar flyer that manipulates leadership right now. That will still manipulate leadership in the 8th edition.
And we know that because they highlighted that in the article, right? But what else exists in the game that can do that?
I mean, there's things like
there's the
powers.
Terrify psychic power that existed. I don't know if it will exist in the future.
There are. I mean, I want to say that there's like a chaos relic somewhere that I think gives somebody a negative fear check. I mean, I could be making that up.
I think no, I don't think you are. I think I actually just played it this week. I don't know that it was a relic, but I think it was just like a unique special rule that a formation
seems like there's something that should exist like that.
Well, just look at, speaking of Chaos Legions, look at the Night Lords, for example. The Night Lords are a great example of an army that is built to play with your leadership. They have modifiers to fear tests and things like that. In a world where Marines are no longer fearless, that fearless is, as we know it, is being dished out on a very, very small first come first served basis. Like, you have an entire army that plays with your leadership if you engage with them. All of a sudden, that useless set of traits becomes incredibly concerning to their opponent.
I think you're right. And they should know no fear is probably going to have to go through some metamorphosis. I bet we're going to see some effect. Maybe a reroll morale checks, maybe a modifier like we're talking about of some kind. Maybe the chaplain further reinforces it. Who knows? I think that's going to be one of those things that get played with because I think in They Should Know No Fear is a staple that we're not going to see go away, but it will change.
Yeah, the way it works is definitely going to be different.
So I have a question for y'all. I think we've talked about morale, we've talked about shooting, psychic, we've talked about charging, assault. We've got enough to base some preliminary hypothetical. There's nothing based in fact here. This is all just our opinions. I want to know what you think, walking away from what we know, who are the clear winners in 8th edition?
You mean like a faction-wise?
Yeah, 100%.
Definitely Blood Angels. Blood Angels, every single base rule benefits the Blood Angels right now.
I agree with that. Chris, what do you think?
Well, I'm going to give you two guesses as to whether or not I agree with Paul's assessment. But you're only going to need one because, I've basically been writing an entire series of articles just about how this benefits.
New criterion to this discussion. It can't be the same thing that Paul said.
Or it just can't be Blood Angels, right? Okay. We haven't necessarily talked about charging, right? And how that, but it's on the YouTube page and we'll of course cover it as on further shows because this is where things are going to get real interesting. So being able to move a certain amount of distance that's not 6 anymore. You're not locked into 6. So, maybe things like Hormigons or even Gene Stealers or whatever, they might have a really fast movement. And then being able to charge 12, or 2d6, charge 2d6, but getting an effective 13 inches, and then getting an effective activation in the fight phase of being able to move an additional 3 inches, which probably translates to an additional the fourth phantom inch. What is it? The 12th
phantom
man.
Inch.
Yeah, the 12th man on your team.
I'm going to coin that
is
from
that,
now
is
on.
that phantom inch.
You heard it
I
here
have a
first,
feeling.
guys. Anytime you're within an inch, you have the phantom inch.
Phantom Inch.
With things like that, subtly benefiting armies that have been historically difficult to actually make an impact, like Horde armies, for instance, if they have some way to offset this morale mechanic, it would be devastating if somebody shoots at your unit of 30 gaunts. You lose 15 of them, then you roll a d6, and then you just pick them all up to morale. I don't know that that's going to happen. I think there's going to be ways to mitigate that. But with these it's not even subtle, these phantom inches and all this additional pile-in and being able to engage units that you didn't actually charge in the fight sub-phase, then that's going to give some strength to these armies, the Orcs, the Tyranids.
And that's, to answer your question finally, Adam, especially after what Paul just said, I will throw a bone to my arch nemesis, the Tyranids. From way back when I first started playing Space Hulk, these guys have been hounding me and being a pain in my butt. But I think that they are going to have some time to shine.
So that was going to be my answer as well. But I think on a broader scope, right off the bat, I think Tyranids got a boost with what we've seen. I think anything that has a swarm capability, going back to what Paul was saying, whether it's Fenrisian Wolves, whether it's Kroot, they're not a swarm, but you can take, how many of them can you take in a unit? 20
right
tops.
Now you can take a bunch, and they're cheap.
Yeah, and they're cheap. And I think we're going to see a lot of cheap screening units that can tie in and lock up people in combat and force morale checks. I think we're going to see a resurgence in that. And I think that goes back to what Games Workshop was saying on their community page and on the Facebook page, that there's going to be layered assaults and layered shooting. And I can't wait for that, because that takes finesse, and I love playing finesse 40k.
It's going to be nice, man. Let's take a quick break, then we'll come back and talk about things to do while you are waiting on this edition to come out.
Not on the list, crocheting.
Hold tight, guys.
FTN is brought to you by Bell of Lost Souls. Check out www.bols.org for the best daily hobby articles on the web.
Hey everybody, we are back. I'm still Paul. I got Adam Abramowitz and Chris Morgan.
I was Chris Morgan, but I am no longer.
What are you now?
I am the amorphous blob that was Chris Morgan.
Okay.
I'm glad we sorted that out. SoCal Open tickets. SoCal Open 2017 is in Del Mar, California, October 21st to the 22nd. I say why? Because gaming on the beach is awesome.
Perfect opportunity to base your models and get basic materials. So have a party.
It's not actually on the beach, it's by the beach. Registration opened on May 1st, so that was a couple days ago from the point of this recording. You can go to frontlinegaming.org/SoCal-Open 2017, or just search for SoCal Open 2017. They also have a Facebook group. Tickets are on sale right now. They're planning for a ton of people to be at this event. It's at a decent time of year. In a place that I don't think gets winter. So, if you come from a place that's already deep into, the frozen north, maybe this is a place to get away for a weekend.
It's Frontline, so you know that these guys are going to put on an excellently run event. And the fact that you're in an area that lets you go and you can play in the gaming hall, but if you bring your family along, there's tons of stuff to do down in San Diego. I spent some time this spring over there with Reese and crew, and every night after we were done working, there was always there was a cool place that we could go, and some excellent Mexican food as well.
That's beautiful, man. So, and of course, their FLG mats have rolled off the line. They've got 80 different styles, all made here in their facility in the U.S. with terrain to match. So, we're going to talk about things to do while you're waiting on 8th, and terrain is going to be a big part of it. I think this is one of those times where that. There's a lull right now. We don't know what to build, and that sets some of us kind of, idle hands. I guess is what I mean. I think it's safe to say that things that probably what we know is good right now may become better, and things that we know that are great right now may become less better. That's like what we're used to. But with all this change, there's no way to really just absolutely call that, to predict that. I've got a squad of Howling Banshees that I think have been on my shelf since 4th edition. I don't think I've played with.
Oh man, them Banshees.
But you get where I'm saying, though. That was something that I speculated on and ended up being wrong for 2 editions. So, I think that maybe building armies outside of, they already told us, Hemlock Fighters, Nova Cannons, and Noise Marines probably going to be high on the list of things that are good.
So, Paul, let me ask you this. How many Assault Marines do you have just waiting for an opportunity to jump into action?
It's I think the correct term is an embarrassment of Assault Marines.
Oh, yes. So like a murder of crows and embarrassment of Assault Marines.
Yeah.
I think I have 2 embarrassments myself.
Yeah, that's how I would classify the number of Assault Marines that I have. But things we can do while we're waiting, again, is on terrain. And some of these places, like Frontline and other places that have terrain for sale, it takes a little to doctor it up. Now, they kind of give you some guides on how to make it match the mats that they also sell. But maybe you've got a table at home and your buddies play on it, and you got the same foam hills for the last couple of editions. You haven't really invested into line of sight blocking stuff. Maybe like you should. Maybe you've got Coke cans. Maybe you've got I've seen some great tournaments, but their line of sight blocking stuff is just like a block of foam in the front or in the middle of the table that just functions as line of sight. This is some time where you could spend a few weeks really sprucing up your terrain.
To your credit, what you were saying, I'm seeing more and more companies, maybe they're not all quite to the level of what Frontline is putting out with their ITC terrain. There is a plethora of options out there for us today.
And hobby time is a premium, right? So, I could see this is all like when you're a tournament organizer. Sometimes that you think that the last thing you ever really focus on is the terrain. That's got to be But as tournament organizers, we know that's the first thing. But definitely as a player, your home stuff, the last thing you think about is your display board and your terrain. So these types of projects, now's the time to get them in because that's the only thing for certain that you're going to need. You're going to need terrain. You might need a display board. Maybe you want to rebase your models. Maybe this is the time you've finally been waiting to crack off some of those 25s and move them up to 32s.
And one of the things that I think is one of the unsung virtues of terrain is that terrain can always be used for something. Like you can put it on your display board when you're not putting it on the table. You can have it work for multiple game systems. Like because of how popular Shadow War Armageddon now and how much that depends on terrain. Like if you're building a bunch of stuff to play Shadow War, because Shadow War is going to be, it's going through 8th edition. It's going to be what it is. All of that stuff you're making for Shadow War has a place on a 40k terrain table.
This is the time to get rid of that hobby itch because we don't know what to build or paint. Build and paint terrain, man.
Yeah, it's going to be a factor. We know that especially the kits that are produced by Games Workshop are going to have rules. So if maybe you don't like that one, maybe you find some of these other company terrain kits that look similar that are going to fit that aesthetic that's looking for your army. And this is one of those rare times when we can't be planning necessarily for the codexes that are out now because we know they're getting replaced. But I have idle hands. Like I've chosen to build a Sigmar army. I'm 20 Dryads away from a 2,000-point Sylvaneth army, as you guys know.
You mentioned that we're going to have rules for GW terrain. And for those of us that are tournament players, what does that mean at tournament level?
Now, this is an interesting question. From my experience being a TO at the LVO and dealing with some terrain questions before the event, the GW terrain kits as terrain pieces, it's pretty tricky because the kits, they come in a variety of different ways you can put them together. But all the example pictures of the GW terrain with the rules in it is built a specific way. So, from my perspective, and this is a perspective that is shared among the TOs that I know, is that if you're going to be using terrain for its rules, it needs to look just like the example. It can't have any extra size, any extra floors. It can't have an artificial base around it that doesn't exist on the model that you're paying points for. So from a tournament perspective, having something like that can get confusing and semi-problematic for people.
I'm just talking purely about terrain that you put on the table, not terrain that you pay for. Unless that's what you were talking about.
Well, let me kind of get to your point, I think, is that in the rule book for even 7th edition, all that terrain had rules. Now, at tournaments, we don't play with them. That's for,
that's what I'm getting at.
You only play with what has points. Okay. We don't know in 8th edition how hardline that will be, how integral to the overall experience and scope of the game rules for these terrain will be. So I suggest building to your own aesthetic. I think building things for your specific table. And we were talking a little bit in the pre-show, Chris. I think there's a point that you have. There's a line of text that I don't believe is throwaway in one of the releases we got from the community page, and you've got some comments on that.
Right. So essentially, what it says is that you're not going to be able to walk through walls anymore. And the way that they phrase it is no more walking through walls, things that make sense. So a lot of the conversation that has stemmed from that, and especially if you look at the blowback from the 7th edition FAQ where they originally said, no, you can't walk through walls. A lot of people responded negatively to that. But I'm going to put forward to you guys right here, right now, I'm getting real, and I'm saying no walking through walls is a good thing for 40K. Now ask me why.
But I'm going to let you know you're on an island right now.
Mm-hmm. Why, Chris? Christopher Morgan, the 4th. Why?
May the 4th be with you tomorrow. So basically, the reason that I think not being able to move through walls is important is that it adds value to units that can jump over terrain. So one of the things that we're seeing in 7th edition 40K right now is that why would you take a jump pack when you can just take a bike instead? The answer to that is because the bike, if it can move through walls, there's no reason to have the jump pack because the bike does everything that the jump pack does better. So in 8th edition, if the bike still moves further, but it has to drive around the building, all of a sudden you have some different tactical choices to make when you're starting to compose your army in the first place. Now, I'm a big jump pack fan, and this is part of why I was teasing Paul about his shameful amount of jump marines. is that if we keep this as a mechanic, all of those models that can jump over terrain all of a sudden have an ability to access objectives or units that you may not be able to get if you're riding around on a bike. And I don't know if you guys know anybody that's ridden a bike before, a motorcycle, but running into walls at full speed, generally doesn't end well for the rider.
I think you might be onto something. And well, I think, okay, let me just say that I think your reasoning is sound. I think that's probably a better way of putting it. I think that is excellent analysis on why that might be a function in the new set.
So that's kind of why what I'm pointing out to people is that, you know, if you're going to house rule it, oh yeah, I can walk through walls. All right, fine, you're going to do that. But what you're essentially doing is you're saying, all right, units that benefit from that mobility now don't matter anymore.
Yeah, okay, so that is what they say, though, that walking through walls is going to be difficult. So maybe, I mean, if this influences how you build terrain, it's kind of a mix because line of sight is obviously going to still be a thing.
Right. And that's why I'm glad that I built the terrain the way I did. And this is kind of how this ties into our terrain building discussion is that I will have in a 3-story building that has, say, 2 sides with the back open, every other floor will be blocked off. So I could have the bottom floor blocked off or the middle floor blocked off. And then, like, say, the top floor blocked off. You know, it's going to alternate. There's going to be a way to block line of sight, but there's also going to be a method of egress and a method of ingress. There's doors on the bottom floor. When I built these things in the beginning, I built them with the idea in mind that I wanted them as buildings to make sense. And I think what that's going to do is it's going to make my terrain usable in 8th edition.
That is a solid bet.
Yeah, it's something that kind of makes me happy, and I don't mean to sound clairvoyant or like pat myself on the back. You know,
I think you were speculating on some text that we had. You're using the information that we have to make an educated decision about how you spend your hobby time. What is it? What else do we do here?
Yep, that's you summed it up, Paul. Drop the mic. We're done.
Well, you know, there's other ways we can spend some of our hobby time during this transition, and Shadow War Armageddon is definitely one of those. Shadow War Armageddon, Blood Bowl. I mean, I feel like that, you know, Blood Bowl didn't come out all that long ago, and I think like for us on the 40k side, it's like we may have already forgotten about it, but that's Shadow War Armageddon now become, and Blood Bowl, I think those are the 2 brilliant one-off games that you can play. And Silver Tower. I mean, come on. I can't believe and I'm saying that surprised because I'd almost forgotten about Silver Tower during the course of the conversation.
And you've been gushing about that game since it came out.
It's beautiful. I mean, everything about it just flows, man. It's not complicated. You can sit around and you can get people who don't know how to play these games, these miniature-based strategy games, and play that game. And everything it's a very much self-contained, right there in the box experience that you could do over the course of several evenings with buddies who aren't wargaming professionals.
Right. And that's always the hardest thing. And one of the things I'm looking forward to the most about the new edition is just when you open up a game like Shadow War or a game like Silver Tower, somebody who's never touched that before can jump right into it, and it's fairly intuitive, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think so. And we can talk about Shadow War. You know, we talked about the size of the armies before, how they're small. But if you look at it to a new player side, it's not intimidating. You can even probably give them some models out of your bits box to play.
Yeah, and at that point, you're feeling pretty sly, wouldn't you say, Paul?
Well, yeah, you've now indoctrinated someone into the tribe. You know,
yep.
I guess at that point. But it is. It's one of those things where you can have, like, I played Harlequins for the night that we played, and this has been a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. So at this point, but it wasn't even a box of troops. Like, it was 4 models, I think.
It wasn't even a full troop of troops?
No, it wasn't. And the orc player, even the low-cost horde army of Shadow War was only a box of boys. And that comes in the main set.
Yeah. I mean, it's great. And it gives me a reason to go back and finish some of those scouts that I've been building. I need to get back on Twitter so I can start doing more hobby progress pictures.
It's so
especially
fun.
Now that especially now that the semester is over. I'm really looking forward to having more time to paint. And I started some scouts that I used Blood Angel uncovered heads and masked faces for the heads on these scouts, and I tested out some freehand. I was just trying to make them nice and shiny, but I got about halfway through with one of the squads, and then it just kind of fell off. And this makes me want to go back and finish them.
I haven't played every army, of course. I've seen Eldar, I've seen Orcs, I've seen Harlequins, and Space Marines played. That's just what we've done in our little test environment here. But it seems like if there's a unit out there, if there's an army that you just were curious about, you just wanted to paint, like we oohed and awed over Scions a while back.
Yeah.
Those, because they're great figures, man. You just want to find a reason to put them on the table.
I have a box of them just sitting around that I got, with some tournament win money that I haven't done anything with, but I got them because I thought they were cool.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think they have rules in Shadow War. They're operatives, I think, but they could easily be your scout unit. That's where I'm going. Like you could do a little hobby
scouts,
project. Like say
Inquisition.
Yeah. Let's say that you got a unit of scouts and you built them as the Bolter Scouts. You've now got these close combat bits left over. That would make some awesome, and vice versa. That would make some really cool things in Shadow War. Little vanity hobby projects that you've always wanted to do, but didn't feel like you had the time for. Believe me when I say you may have to twist your own arm, but you have the time right now.
Yes. I'm just going to keep repeating that to myself every night when I go to bed. I have more time right now. I have more time right now.
Well, I mean, things like, I know we talked about this last week, and I'm not overly pitching it, but like the Kit Bash crew, that people are sharing their photos on Facebook and in Facebook groups, and it helps keep people motivated. Same way I use Twitter. Like I post my work in progress stuff. I say my work in progress, not good enough for our Facebook page on FTN, but I share it on my personal account on Twitter. And it just, one like, and that's why I try to spread it around, man. I see somebody doing something cool, I try to like it and try to say, that's cool. I saw somebody rebasing an army today, and they had a cool acid. They were calling it their acid bases.
You guys just need to know, all you listeners out there, the unrealistic beauty standards that Paul Murphy has for our Facebook page.
I like to keep it as classy as possible,
It's paint shaming, and it needs to stop.
Look, y'all don't want to see my WIPs there, but Twitter, on the other hand, whatever. But I'm talking about other people's stuff on Twitter, when I getcha. Some real neat stuff to have people doing it, and them hitting the like on my post or saying cool encourages me to do the next thing, and then so I just try to spread that around, and that's what keeps us motivated. So again, that little bit of twist your arm, you may not think you have time, but if you were going to paint a squad of Possessed or whatever, which is probably good speculation material if you ask me, Possessed, I don't know.
Oh yeah, that's low-hanging fruit for a unit that could obviously use some help.
But that unit needs some help for several. That's like the Howling Banshees of the Chaos world.
Yes, well, There's one of those. One squad that I've really wanted to try and paint up are the Dark Eldar Mandrakes. I think those look really cool.
God, they're so good. Adam actually dropped off, but he's painting a unit of them right now, and they are beautiful models.
And they're sinister, they're scary, and they've got this cool like cracked skin kind of. I feel like I could pull them right out of like World of Warcraft or something. They just have this completely savage-looking dudes, and there's so much room to make them look just evil and threatening. And I know that in Shadow War, for example, witches are the only ones that you can field there. But there's nothing stopping me from witching up some mandrakes. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think that anybody who plays, look, most people play, I think, in a forgiving community. If you're traveling to tournaments, then counts as and stuff becomes a little bit more of a touchy subject. But on these one-off games, as I'll describe them, the Shadow Wars, the Blood Bowls, or whatever, people are going to be incredibly forgiving with your modeling choices. As long as you're trying, man. I don't think anyone's going to have a crossword to say as long as you're trying to clearly put together a cool-looking figure.
Yeah. Well, then it gives you that opportunity to play with something that you don't have to drop an entire $500 to get 1,000 points worth of whatever army it is. You can test something out. You can just test how it feels. You can start enjoying it. You can really focus on those dudes and personalize them and make them distinct and unique. And I love the idea that we may be kind of on the edge of what's gonna happen, what's gonna be good with the new edition, because I'm not gonna assume, and I don't think you are either, Paul, that everything's going to be equally good, right?
I don't. I think, though, when you have this much variability between all the different units and everything that it needs to give context to other units, then everything's not going to be good.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it like shooting, the grouping of the bullets, I think is going to be tighter in terms of the power level. But there's still going to be some weird thing that's off one direction in the low power level range, and then there might be one that's in the high power level range. But at least we know that they're going to be doing another round later. But in terms of what you can do now to play some of these other things that are, regardless of what happens with the new edition, you can have this fun pet project. You can put it down. You can play with a bunch of different people. There is stuff to do.
Yeah, and it's supported too. Like just today, Shadow War Armageddon got an article released on the community page about how to include what they call it armies of one. And my man Sly Marbo came back into the fold.
Mm-hmm. Good old Sly.
No, they've got a different figure. They've kit bashed a figure for him, so it's not the metal models. But I like that. Now, the figure looks cool, obviously painted incredibly well there. But I like it that they're not setting that kind of false expectation. You can just run out and grab the model.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I think that the concept for Shadow War is pretty cool, that you just have this one really cool person that either you're hunting or you're just one really cool dude being hunted. Like there's one of my buddies, he suggested on the Facebook page when they put up their article linking to the community site, he's like, well, perfect candidate for this would be like the Tyranid Lictor or a Broodlord. There's so much potential for some really, really cool like lone hunter type scenarios.
I think we'll see it all. I think that they are fully, and they promise us this, and it's really nice to see it coming together, because it's not easy. I mean, granted, whatever, it's their job. That's what they should be doing every day, is supporting all the stuff that they sell models for, right? So I'm not overly glorifying this experience, but they had mentioned that these games will be fully supported. They're becoming part of the core. I don't know if that's their words or just our words, but we're seeing it. And so if you did invest in the Shadow Wars and some of these other specialist games, you're going to see support for them, which is nice. Even and that could just be in the White Dwarf, but it could be on their webpage, could be on the Facebook page. And I haven't been disappointed with what we've seen so far from some of these bigger things like Silver Tower, Blood Bowl, and Shadow War Armageddon.
Oh, the new White Dwarf is coming out. Just released the Carriage and Overlords rules for Silver Tower for your characters. So, I mean, that's a pretty fast. I mean, considering that they're still releasing models for these guys on new release, they were ready to go with some rules so you could bring these characters in and play them with Silver Tower. Like while you're building your main army, you can go on a quest with your Aether Chemist or your Admiral.
That's pretty cool. I mean, that game, I can't say, I gushed about it before. I can't say enough good things about it just because of the sheer replayability and the ability to play with people who don't wargame, which is not something we get to do with our cool Warhammer models very often.
Right.
Well, dude, let's go ahead and wrap this up. Next week, I want to talk about some of the actual kill teams for Shadow War Armageddon, and maybe build a couple of the ones that we haven't talked about yet. Maybe we do that in between this other week while we're basking in all this cool Warhammer 8th Edition glory.
Yeah, I mean, a lot has gone unsaid, even on this show, and we've been talking about it quite a bit. And people have just kind of glossed over the articles about the setting. There's a demonic invasion on Armageddon right now. Like, no one cares. but the people on Armageddon, they're going to care very soon. And there's a lot more than just rules and things coming out. There's this progression. There's that galaxy map with this giant rift halfway across the galaxy. And it's basically, like, if you look at the rift, Paul, I don't know if you noticed this, but it separates Terra from Baal. So basically, Abaddon is like, I don't want these guys coming to help again.
He doesn't want any of that.
No, he's like, not again. This went so bad for me last time.
I saw a cool theory today about how Sanguinus could get resurrected or reborn or have his memories transformed into something else. Or transferred, I guess, into something else.
Now, Paul, I've been talking about that since I've been on the show.
Well, we'll leave it at that then. Thanks for talking with me tonight, Chris. And Adam sends regards. His computer killed over on him part of the way through the recording. But, if you guys are doing any kind of get-you-by hobby projects, share them with us, please, in one of these various forums that we talked about, or a message on our Facebook page. Love to do that kind of stuff. It's the thing that inspires us and inspires other people to do the same thing. We're all in this together.
Yeah, maybe I'll talk Paul into letting us post some of our work in progress pics on the Facebook.
Good night, everybody.
Cheers.
I see dead people.